All right. Hello and welcome to our event. Thank you all for coming out today. My name is Anna. I'm one of the Campus Common Read Committee members. So I'll be sharing some introductions and just giving a quick overview of the initiative for this year. Today's event is The Roots of Resistance, Women Activists During the Progressive Era in Grand Rapids. And we're going to be touching on a lot of different things today, but we're really tracing everything back to some of the history of Grand Rapids and kind of Grand Rapids impact on the rest of the country in the world. So, the 2026-27 Campus Common Read Initiative is going to be a three-phase exploration of history, democracy that intentionally connects the 175th anniversary of Grand Rapids, the 250th anniversary of the United States, and the 112th anniversary of Grand Rapids Community College. So there are free copies of the book that we're reading this year. You can stop by the RJF or Raleigh Finkelstein Hall, 505, or the Lakeshore campus. But you can also read it online if that's what you would prefer. There's going to be a few events coming up for the rest of the spring. So there's going to be two more in March, one on the 18th, and then also one on the 25th. All are free and open to the public, and everyone's welcome to join. Yeah, and so for now, I'm going to introduce our presenter, Sophia Ward Brewer, who's going to be presenting today and drawing our attention to women activists in Grand Rapids during the Progressive Era. It was a time of intense social change, as well as the founding of GRCC. So please help me welcome Sophia.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay? Is my mic working? I want to make sure it's working okay. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending our premier event for the Campus Coming Reading. And so make notes, share with your friends. We're going to have other events that are going to be happening throughout the year, all the way through April of 2027. So this initiative is a long initiative. And if you're interested in getting involved, contact myself. I'm co-chair along with Dr. Dylan Carr over here. Contact us and let us know if you want to get involved. And so I'm going to start off by talking about one of the things that have been a part of my research regimen. One of the things that I absolutely love is the progressive era. And so the progressive era is about from 1890s to about 1920s. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I want to tell you, really, like, the women that I'm going to be talking to you about are all like friends in my head. It's like they talk to me and they unveil things to me and they tell me secrets all through the research. And it is like, you guys, it is so rich. It's like finding little gold pieces, because every time you find something new, that is something else, that is a resource that you can share with the world. And so I hope you enjoy this introduction of my friends who lived long before me, but they are now living in I feel like I live in this particular era. And so join me for this great ride. Roots of Resistance, Women Activists in the Progressive Era. Now, my area of study is mostly African American women. I am a part of the Greater Grand Rapids Women's History Council. And when I joined the council in 2018, there wasn't a whole lot of people studying this era. So I jumped in and started, well, I had already previously been studying it, but that is what made me a good fit for the Greater Grand Rapids Women's History Council, was this focus on African American women during that particular time. And so get ready to learn and be absolutely entertained. So I see my S move down, but change. I'm defining throughout this process. When I'm thinking about grassroots, I'm thinking about change that begins at the local level by everyday people, rather than national figures or national institutions, which is kind of the core of our Campus Common Reading in our Grand Rapids Grassroots books, which is about current day grassroots. But that was preceded, that preceded what happened years and years ago here in Grand Rapids. And so national leaders get the attention. So if I asked you about some national leaders from that particular time, if I asked you who was Frederick Douglass, how many people, by show of hands? Mary Church Terrell. Let's see, Ida B. Wells, Susan B. Anthony. So you know those national figures. But do you know Emma Ford, Valerie Martin, my friend here, is actually the historian for the state legislature. And so she came, but yeah, she's gonna know everybody I'm talking about. We've been talking. Okay, so Emma Ford. What about Mary Roberts Tate? What about Elizabeth Burton Ketchum? So, so all of these are women who, those last few names are women who actually did kicked off the grassroots efforts right here in Grand Rapids. So I want to set the stage. So the national stage, things are happening. So this is 1890s is what, 13 years after the end of the Reconstruction era. So Reconstruction had ended. Jim Crow and segregation is the law of the land. We're in the middle of a great migration from people moving from the South to the North for opportunity. Women's suffrage is going on. Women are fighting and clamoring for the right to vote, but there's also this industrial growth with an E. Sorry. And workers' rights. But also right in the middle of that, which is very prevalent, very consistent with what we're doing today, is the founding of GRCC in 1914. That happened during the Progressive era. So right on time for that. I also want to kind of set the stage because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is the movement through women's clubs and suffrage organizations during this particular time. So it was the formation of many, many literary clubs all across the country, the formation of civic clubs by women as well, women's suffrage, and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. We're going to talk about that a lot more in the next couple of slides. And then I wanted to kind of point you to some of the early Grand Rapids clubs. So the Ladies Literary Club was formed in as early as the 1870s, but they were officially organized in 1882. The Grand Rapids Women's Suffrage Association was formed right here in 1883 after a tour with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who visited Michigan and visited the Grand Rapids area. We're going to learn a lot more about that coming up as well. And then the Married Ladies Literary Club, which was one of the first Black women's clubs formed in Grand Rapids, is really my area of expertise. So Lorraine Pratt Inman. So she was a philanthropist. She went to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia to be specific, and she went to school for eloquy. Am I saying it right? Eloquy and oration. And so she came back from school and she started to organize a lot of literary clubs. Her first club was the Shakespearean Club, but she also was one of the founding members of the Ladies Literary Club here in Grand Rapids. She later formed, in around 1883, the Grand Rapids Women's Suffrage Association, later called the Grand Rapids Equal Suffrage. So she did some groundbreaking work in starting to get women to organize. And these clubs were really like training grounds for women where they learned history, they learned about the political issues, they learned about how to speak in public. These were great training grounds for those particular skills. The next woman that I would like to introduce you to is Emily Burton Ketchum. I think I called her Elizabeth earlier. Emily Burton Ketchum was like this powerhouse for women's suffrage. She became really, really great friends with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In fact, Susan B. Anthony often came and visited her and stayed at her home right here in Grand Rapids. Ketchum spoke all over the country on suffrage rights. And she formed organizations right here in Grand Rapids. And she actually put Grand Rapids on the national scene when it comes to women's suffrage because of her friendship with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They were constantly here. In fact, in 1899, the National Association, as you can see, the Women's Suffrage Association Convention was held right here in Grand Rapids. At that convention where Susan B. Anthony was at that convention. So the next thing I want to kind of talk to you about is the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Anybody ever heard of the WCTU? So these women were like super bold. I mean, when we talk about training ground for speaking up and speaking out and being able, I mean, these women were trained to go sit in local salons and pour out liquor when men came in to drink the liquor. It was crazy. They were trained and able to do some amazing work. And a lot of the women during this time joined this organization, not only because of the temperance, but this woman, Frances Willard, who was the second president for the Women's Christian Temperance Union, but the most popular one, did this thing about, she says, no, we're not just going to fight for temperance. We're going to fight for everything. And so she had this do everything model, which also included suffrage and education and health. And so so women were really activated through these clubs. So I always show this one because I want to kind of give you guys some context when we talk about alcohol and how alcohol was so prevalent at that particular time. There were whole political parties that were formed, like the Prohibition Party, that was formed specifically to deal with the alcohol issue in the United States. So I read these statistics that, like currently, the average American, when they average out American alcohol consumption, they say it on average is about 3.5 gallons a year currently. Back then, it was 8.5 gallons a year. That's the difference in the amount of 80 proof is what I mean, or higher alcohol consumption during that particular time. That's a lot of alcohol, y'all. And what was happening is that men would get paid from work, they would go to the saloon and they would gamble and drink their money away. And many of the women and children were starving. So that's what's kind of what activated the Women's Christian Temperance Union. They wanted to try to mitigate some of that from happening. Is it making sense? Okay, let's move on. And so, also during this time, in 1896, the National Association for Colored Women's Clubs was formed. And three of my favorite women were founding members of this association. We're talking Mary Church Terrell, Harriet Tubman, and my favorite of all time, Ida B. Wells, right? And you all know them, but they lived and they actually corresponded with some of the women that we are going to be talking about, local women. Okay, so one of the first local African American women I want to introduce you to is like um, one of my favorite to talk about, and this is Emma Ford. So Emma Ford was born Emma Warren in Canada. She married a man, they called him Senator Joe Ford. Well, he wasn't a senator. He actually worked for 50 years on and off for the Michigan State Legislature. He was a member of the Republican Party, and he was the cloakroom operator for that many years. And so that's why they nicknamed him Senator Joe. They had two children, Chandler and Theola, and Theola is going to become important as we kind of go through the process here. She died on November 11 in 1937 in Chicago, visiting her daughter, who was a teacher in Chicago, and she resided right here in Grand Rapids. She actually for a large portion of the time lived on Jefferson Avenue. So I want you to understand that when we talk about grassroots, we're talking about this activism, we're talking about people that live and did things to improve our neighborhoods, to improve life for us right now. So Emma's story actually starts before she was born, though. Her story is so rich. When I started digging up and I found information about Emma Ford, I was like, this is juicier than the stories that we watch on TV. I mean, this story was so juicy. So Emma's parents was Sarah Judson. This is Sarah Judson. Her father's name his first name is escaping me, but that's her father next to her. And you see, I got this broken relationship between them because Miss Sarah ran off and married the black farmhand. Sarah was a rich heiress in Pontiac, Michigan. She left her cushy life and ran to Canada to marry Joe Warren in 1859. So think about that year. That is before the Civil War. So interracial marriages wasn't just taboo. They were illegal in a lot of states. So her father was broke down and crying, and all the newspapers reported. It's like social media. The newspaper reported everything. So her father and brother went and got her from Canada, brought her back to Indiana. First of all, I've skipped a slide. I need to turn my slides because I get excited. Sorry, y'all. So that story made not only national news, it made international news. There were articles in Ireland, in England, all about this white heiress running away to Canada with the black farmhand in 1859. And now her, like I said, her father and her brother went and got her and brought her back. They promised her. There's this whole page long article talking about her father when they went to Canada and brought her back, and how they interviewed her at the train station in Canada, and how she said that I'm going back because my dad says he's gonna let Joe come back with me eventually. So they came back, went to Indiana, got the marriage annulled, and then when the father didn't let Joe come back, she eloped with him again. So this talks about her marrying him a second time. See, I told y'all this stuff was juicy. She married him a second time and fled back to Canada to be with him. The papers were absolutely cruel. So this is after Emma, her child that I'm going to be talking about, was born. They were still writing about this incident, and they were not nice. They had had 2 children, and it was horrible. So in 1881, Joe Ford, this gentleman here, went to Canada and met Emma Ford, and they got married in 1881. Out of their union was born 2 children, Chandler and Theola. That's Joe Ford. They were, simply put, a power couple. They traveled the country. There are lots of articles about them traveling. They were involved in the Eastern Stars. They were involved in the NAACP when it formed here in 1919. They were involved in a lot of things, and they were sought after lecturers and speakers. In fact, this article comes from a newspaper in Indiana reporting that they are sharing that in 1931 they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. So that's Emma and Joe during their 50th wedding anniversary. Now, who were they? Why were they so important? This article from the Petoskey Resorter can give you some idea about how prolific they were. So the Petoskey Resorter has this to say of a well-known young colored man of this city who is also well-known at Lansing every legislative year. If there is anyone in Mackinac Island, which kind of threw you for a loop, right? In Mackinac Island, who is chock full of business, it is Joe Ford, or Senator as he is best known, and his wife. They run the best restaurant on the island. This is 1893. That is, Mrs. Ford runs it while the senator is doing routine work as the best and most popular Wagner Parlor car conductor on the GR&I with route between Grand Rapids and Mackinac City. So that gives you some idea about how they got back and forth. But he is a porter. And at that time, porters had a lot of influence in the Black community. Just on the side, and to keep him out of mischief, when on the Grand Rapids end of his route, Joe does real estate. So this man is a cloakroom operator for the Michigan legislator, is a porter, has a restaurant, and does real estate on the side. Already owned multiple homes in 1893. This is a Black couple that has been hidden, all of this history, all of this richness hidden for years. Okay, and so it kind of talks about his real estate business and talk about Mrs. Ford running the restaurant. This is her outside of her restaurant in Mackinac Island. The carriage side of the carriage says Ford the caterer. I can tell you more stories about her. Her brother actually was a barber in Mackinac Island. Her brother, she had another brother who actually worked for Tuskegee, worked with George Washington Carver at the Tuskegee Institute. You're talking about somebody getting even. Her mother and father went through a lot, but they got even because all their children were highly successful. The brother that was the barber became a lawyer. And he wrote the Michigan Progress Freedom Manual. They were amazing. And her brother Charles was one of the first African Americans to work at the Michigan legislature for Governor Ferris. Their story just gets richer and richer. Every little nugget you find. I love it. So I'm sorry. So this is an article about Emma Ford's restaurant and some of her work. It talks about her WCTU work. It talks about her a delegate for the Colored Women's Club. And this article was written in 1901. And it says that she was an island fixture for 11 years. So that means the business was in operation since 1890. Did you even think this was possible? We a restaurant. She had a restaurant. She was a caterer and a baker. She employed 17 people, and they talk about how good her restaurant was in that last sentence. These are ads for her restaurant that were published in the paper. You can see, and they talk about don't bring your baskets, because then when people were traveling up to Mackinac, they would, because it was a long day, they would bring baskets so that they can eat, have food to eat afterwards. So she was saying, don't bring your baskets. I got you. I'll feed you. So Emma Ford was a great friend of a woman who was one of the founding members or early members of the WCTU. And that woman is Lucy Thurman. So Lucy Thurman and Emma Ford often visited each other. So I find articles where Lucy was staying here or Emma was staying over in Jackson, Michigan, where Lucy Thurman was. And so so Lucy had a big influence on Emma, and she is the one that kind of got her interested in working with the WCTU. And in 1907, there was a Michigan um, um, convention for the Michigan Colored Women's Association right here in Grand Rapids. And Emma was the chair for that event. But during the event, Grand Rapids boasted five clubs. The black population here in Grand Rapids was under 1,000, and yet there were 5 women's clubs. And Emma Ford was a founding member or a founding member or the president of all 5 of them. That woman was busy, really helping Black people to organize in the city. And you're going to learn a little bit more about the why later on in this presentation. But she was a powerhouse. This is some of her WCTU work, and they met at on Division at the McMullen Building, which is still there. In a lot of the articles, I found that Emma was either a financial organizer or a treasurer or a secretary. So that told me that she was really organized. Because at this time, you didn't have no typewriter. You didn't have no computers. You did not have the ability. That means you were doing all that manually. And so this is the building. See, this is the McMullen building back in the day, and this is the building now. It's still there on the corner of Division and Oaks. Anybody recognize this building? Up there. Okay, so this is like, I love being able, I found this when I was looking through the Library of Congress through Mayor Church Terrell's address book. And look whose name I found. Emma Ford, 346 Jefferson Avenue, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Great, right? I mean, that was like, oh my gosh, she knew, they knew each other. Ah! And so this is some of Emma's club work. Um, Oftentimes when we think about discrimination in the city and we think about activism that has happened in the city, one of the um, one of the incidents that a lot of people go to is the Emmett Bolden incident, where Emmett Bolden sued a theater for being kicked out of for not being able to sit in the seats that he bought because of the segregation line. And so, even prior to this, if you in 1907, as president of the Phyllis Weekly Club, her daughter Theola went to uh, an event at the Majestic Theater, which is now the Civic Theater, right out here. Went to a show at the Majestic Theater, and she was discriminated against in the sense that they were already sitting in the balcony. They bought seats and were willing to sit in the balcony, but the show must have been sold over, and so they got pushed out. And so they when they went back the next day and were meeting, um, Emma Ford wrote this resolution: be it resolved that we, the Phyllis Weekly Circle, protest against this discrimination, and that we be accorded the rights of all citizens, which is given by the law of Michigan. And these articles kind of tell all about that particular incident in 1907. So she was outspoken. I mean, she was like moving. These were really some really big efforts on her part during this particular time. So this is kind of like her timeline. In 1890, in 1880, she was a member of the one of the first AME churches here in Grand Rapids, and she was kind of like an organizer and did a lot of work with the church. In 1890, she joined the WCTU and became a superintendent of the work among what they call colored people at that particular time. She owned a restaurant. She was a founding member of the Married Ladies 19th Century Club. And over there on the end is just some of the meetings that happened in her home. She was the women that I'm talking about. Most of the women had husbands that actually had businesses, and then they would often have businesses as well and do work. And so they were actually quite influential and really quite bougie. So this here is just she was sought after. You know, there's a Indianapolis. I mean, she was a sought after for her work and so people would call her to do stuff in other states as well. And so this is her death announcement from the Grand Rapids Press. And she died when she was 74. She died in Chicago while visiting her daughter in 1937. And so this one, it even talks about, yeah. So that article gives a lot of information about her as well. So this is Emma Ford's daughter, Theola. And Theola became a teacher in Grand Rapids. Um, on the right-hand side, that's an image of Hattie Beverly, who was the first African-American woman to teach in Grand Rapids in 1899. And then Theola became the second person to teach in Grand Rapids 15 years later. I think she started teaching in like 1914. And so, yeah, they were quite prominent. So this woman is Mary Roberts Tate. She was a great friend of Emma Ford's and a founding member of the Married Ladies 19th Century Club, which was that first African American women's club that was formed in 1894. And so she was a founding member of that club. Her husband was a barber, and she was a hairdresser. Her husband was Samuel Tate. That was her second husband, actually. A lot of these women were married multiple times. I can give you some juice on them. Oh, tea. They call it tea now. And so these are articles that Mary Roberts Tate either wrote or co-signed or was a part of. And this first one, I put it there because you can tell that exactly how bougie they were at that particular time. But they also had purpose and was organizing and trying to educate people. So they were driven. They constantly wrote the newspapers to report what they were doing because they didn't want people to think that African Americans were not doing anything or just being lazy. They wanted to show the progress that African Americans were having during that particular time. And so this article, I mean, they owned their own homes. And so this article talks about them meeting at Mrs. Hardy's house. And the subject of the day was Japan. The roll call was responded to by quotations from the recent history of Japan. I mean, like, what would they do if you didn't know your quotation? I mean, could we actually do that today? So this is just an article showing some of the um, some of the attitude and some of the personality of Mary Roberts Tate. So Mary Roberts Tate was also an organizer and lecturer, but she was one of those tell it like it is lecturers. She would get up there and just tell you like, no, you are racist, right? She would just get up there and tell people off. But she was also very good at fundraising. I found several articles about her fundraising for different for building um, funds and other stuff. And this one, on this particular article, it talks about the Spring Street Church burning down, and then it cost the church $750 when they purchased the church, and they still had a um, a mortgage of $232 when it burned down, and D.A. Blodgett from Blodgett Hospital paid the remaining mortgage. So she knew how to talk to the right people. But look, Valerie, you see James going there and some of the names. And so one of the things that we historians do is that when we read these articles, we write down the names that we see because they constantly pop up in other places. And that way, that's another whole story for you to kind of start to tell. None of my presentations are the same because I'm always researching and doing more history on these women and the people that they are connected to. Okay, so this is one of, I mean, they interviewed Mary Roberts Tate. I think this one is from like 1908 or 1909, I think. And this article, she was straight out telling them off about being in cahoots with the South and that segregation had creeped up to the North and how it was getting really bad. She said, the South has kept its hands on the purse of the North and its heel on the neck of the Negro. She was just really, really like outspoken. And there are several articles where she's the one talking. In fact, she is from the Married Ladies 19th Century Club. She is the only one quoted in Randall Jeltz's book, African Americans in the Furniture City. She he quotes her. So this article is about something she did in 1900 when President McKinley was president. Um, in South Carolina, there was a black man was chosen to be postmaster general at one of the cities in South Carolina, chosen by William McKinley. Well, after he was chosen, there was a big pushback in the city. So much to the point where a bunch of people gathered together one night and burnt down the post office, and their living quarters was upstairs. So the postmaster and his daughter were killed. He had 3 other children and a wife. And Mary Roberts Tate, you can see her name down here, was part of the group that were pushing for President McKinley to pay them $40,000 to help the wife and help the wife and kids. And so this is what this article is about, and it was from the Minneapolis, Minnesota. Another woman in I just got to talking with Valerie Marvin about this woman, and her name is Minnie Goggins. And Minnie Goggins was an educator. She was an organizer. She was another founding member of the Married Ladies 19th Century Club, and she started a school for girls. Now, this is some of the why that I was talking to you about. So, back in 1874, I think his name is John Comstock. What's his name? What's Comstock's first name? He was a businessman here in Grand Rapids. And he had a barrel company, which he was producing barrels for people to put food and save liquor in and all those kind of things. And so he needed workers. And so he noticed that most of the people migrating south would often come, but they didn't have a place to stay, so they would keep on moving towards Detroit or whatever. And so he built a row of houses in, called Comstock Row. And so, as part of Comstock Row, when Black people migrated here, they could stay there and work for Comstock at Barrel Company. Well, this was a great thing for a lot of years, but then you start getting people migrating up, and then there start to be nefarious things going on at Comstock Row. One of the major things was prostitution. And so a lot of these clubs were formed during that time and were organizing, and this school specifically was built to kind of start to help women that were migrating north become more socialized and give them other things to do rather than to go hang out at Comstock Row. In fact, that's the quote that's in Randall Jelt's book, is her talking, Mary Roberts Tate talking about Comstock Row. So this is Minnie Goggins on the pamphlet of her, on the cover of her pamphlet, talking about her school and kind of like the motto and stuff for the school. And these are different articles talking about the school. From the very start, the school was struggling with finances, and so a lot of the articles talk about the finances with the school. And so the Richard Allen Home for Girls was the name of it, and so name of the school, and it's actually listed in the Freedmen's Progress as one of the and Mary and Minnie Goggins is listed there as a single woman owning her home, because at this time her husband might have died or something. So more about Minnie Goggins. I'm almost done, y'all. So I always keep this in here. How many of people are familiar with the World War I defense cards that are available at the Grand Rapids Public Library? So Sheila and I are in this, both in the Greater Grand Rapids Women's History Council together, so she knows a lot of this stuff. But so the defense cards were cards that women filled out after the call for help with soldiers during World War I. They asked them to fill out these cards and list your skills and what you might be able to do. So if you had a home with an extra room where a soldier might be able to come to rehabilitate, you would put that information in it. If you were a nurse, or if you had some kind of skill, they had to list those skills. But they did a call out all across the country for women to kind of get involved and fill out these defense cards. And most places, after it was done, threw the cards away. But Grand Rapids Public Library kind of put theirs away and forgot about them. And then 70 years later, they found them and realized just how rich they were, in that it has a lot of genealogy information on it, but it talks about their skills, it talks about what they where they lived. I mean, it's just chock full of information about these women. So if you are doing genealogy, if you had a relative who was a woman here back during the First World War, they probably filled out a card, and you can kind of go through the Grand Rapids Public. You can. It's actually digitized. You can search right online from the Grand Rapids Public Library's page, and you can search for your loved ones' names. In this is Minnie Goggins' card, and she said she was a practical nurse, manicures and hairdos. She was a member of the AME church. She would like to do relief visiting. But Valerie, you see, her mother was still alive. Oh, I went too fast. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the club. So we talked about the Married Ladies 19th Century Club, but an offshoot of the Married Ladies 19th Century Club was the Domestic Workers Club that started, which was the Grand Rapids Study Club. They were formed in 1901, kind of became an official club in 1904. And the Married Ladies 19th Century Club was um, lifting while climbing. And this motto was rowing, not drifting. And these were the younger women, again, mostly domestic workers. And they are still active today. They meet, I think it's the third Thursday of every month online, and they have active members. Okay, this is some of the work of the Grand Rapids Study Club. So, and as you can see, in 1907, there's some information about the Phyllis Weekly Club. That's still, I think, about the convention that was going to be here that year. And it lists a lot of the presidents. And so you see a lot of the women I talked about, Emma Ford, Lucy Thurman, Mary Roberts Tate, are all listed there together. And it says here, Miss Lucy Thurman, who visited the club in the interest of the state convention to convene here in August, the house was prettily decorated in the club colors, pink and white, dainty refreshments. See, that's bougie. That's just bougie. They brought in Langston Hughes twice, and they brought in Ida B. Wells, and so they were really prolific during their time. They were probably the most successful club and obviously the longest lasting club of those clubs. And so there's an image. I still have not been able to figure out the time frame. I asked people to look at the clothes, and most people say about 1930s, 1940s, but I recognize some of the faces, so I don't know how old they were then, though. Okay, so a spinoff of the Women's Study Club was the Pioneering Club, and they were the younger women, and they were formerly called the Junior Study Club, and their motto was from possibility to reality. A lot of these women actually went to school, went to college, and actually did a lot of stuff from a lot of educating. And there is some members of the Pioneering Club. And over on the right-hand side, one of the more famous people is Hazel Grant, and she's on the far right, and she was she was the first African American woman to work for the city clerk's office in Grand Rapids City Clerk's office. And so this is an image of the Pioneering Club, and so I see here. I know I recognize some of the faces over here as well. A lot of these women were also members of the NAACP. In fact, Hazel Grant was the president of the NAACP when they had the riot here in Grand Rapids. I told y'all it was going to be juicy. Any questions? Anna's going to come around with the mic. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you guys attending and being so attentive
What was the name of those little cards that you said were in the museum or,
at the
library?
Grand Rapids.
Mhm.
Yep. Women's defense cards.
Defense cards. Okay,
Hmm.
thanks.
Hmm. Questions? Questions? Nobody on the.
Hi, Sophia. I really appreciated your presentation.
Thank
So I
you.
have just a question. When it went from, I think it was 4 gallons or 18 to 4 gallons or something like that. During that time, was there an issue with like cleanliness and things like that, where the water couldn't be filtered and things like that? Was that a factor
It,
as to
it
why there was a lot of alcohol consumption as well?
you're probably right. They probably use it to sterilize wounds and stuff like that. When they were taking care of themselves and stuff like that. So that might have been an issue. But the research that I used for that particular fact was 3.5 and then about 8 or 8.5, something around that, depending on was talking about consumption. Now, I don't know how they know. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know how they got to that number, but yeah,
Were they required to fill out the cards,
they
the
were not
women?
required to. It was on volunteer basis.
Okay. And were some of the groups that you talked about in the beginning were those groups segregated or no?
That's a great question and a point that I forgot to um, comment on. So one of the earliest segregated groups for women's clubs in America was the WCTU. And so they allowed black women to join very early. The literary clubs a little later on, but there was, I mean, even in 1907 with the Ladies Literary Club here in Grand Rapids, they had, no, it was 1908. After um, Susan B. Anthony died, even though they were not segregated, they invited Mary Roberts Tate to come speak about Susan B. Anthony. And there's a whole program with her on the cover of the program and all of that. And so while they wasn't always open to um, membership, they did communicate and partner in some ways sometimes. But most of the clubs that I mentioned, um, the African American clubs, they didn't have any white members back then. But there are mixed members for the Grand Rapids Study Club right now today. Did I answer your question? Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you. I would be curious I was not familiar with the book you mentioned about African Americans in Grand Rapids, so thank you for that.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit more, though, about the girls' school, the Richard Allen Home for Colored Girls? Was that specifically for orphaned girls or girls who were trying to like work and support themselves?
Yep. It was really like um, shelter, like a home for girls where they can come. And because she was a part of the Married Ladies 19th Century Club, they would try to um, mentor the girls that were coming in and stuff like that. So it would they might have had orphans or whatever, but it was mostly young women that were migrating from the South and coming up here and didn't have anything, and so they would help them by putting them in those homes and stuff. There's quite a bit about the Richard Allen Home for Girls in the papers. So
I noticed that several of the women you highlighted came from Canada. one I noticed Minnie Goggins was born in Canada. Could you speak to that? Why that influence in the Grand Rapids area?
Oh, absolutely. So, in that whole story about um, the Judson, Sarah Judson eloping to Canada, well, there was freedom in Canada. They could go there and they could live as a married couple. I found census records where they're actually living together, and it reports um, both Joseph and Sarah living together with their children. And so Canada was a place of of respite for them. They could rest there. They can really enjoy there, and that's just the place where a lot of people, when they migrated, even through during slavery, they escaped to Canada. But also when after the Civil War, they went to Canada because they found that to be a safer place, especially after some of the court rulings and the Compromise of 1877 and Jim Crow crept in, and so it was simply a safer place for people to live and be themselves. And but they came back here because of opportunities. There was, I mean, Grand Rapids, I mean, this area was growing in opportunity. It wasn't as busy as Detroit, so it was a place for them to be able to live and work and have that proximity to Canada and Detroit as well. So Emma Ford, when she first came, when her parents first came back to America for a short while after the war. So the Civil War ended in 1865, and her parents moved to Saginaw. They moved to Saginaw after but when they changed the laws, some law changed about um, interracial marriages, and then they went back to Canada. They were back and forth between here and Canada.
Did you find any evidence or like anything to speak to Sarah's relationship with her family, like later in life?
Yeah. So her father disowned her. Her brother died early, but she had other brothers and sisters, and she was close with one of her sisters. And I found some articles where her sisters were visiting with them here in Grand Rapids, or they were visiting with their sister on the east side of the state. And so she did have a relationship with, and I only found one, but for the most part, they disowned her.
Thank you, Sophia. I love hearing you talk about this. And but my question is more, what can we learn from the progressive era for now?
Oh my
Like,
gosh. I mean, that ordinary people can do can be activists. That ordinary people, some of the very stuff that you think is an ordinary thing, maybe going to a protest, maybe speaking out, maybe going to the city council, and if some and talking up and speaking up about the injustices that you see happening around the world, around it. Well, we don't even have to go around the world right now. We can just stay right here in the United States. And I mean, some of the injustices that you are seeing, speaking up about those things, and if I'm finding that if your speaking out is not documented by the papers, because the papers don't follow things the way that they do, document it yourself. Tell your stories so that your children and your grandchildren can also become active and activate based on the work that you've done. That's part of your legacy. And so that's what I think. I think the progressive era is this boldness, right? Like when you think about Ida B. Wells or Mary Church Terrell or even Mary Roberts Tate or Emma Ford, I mean, they lived at a time when Black people can be killed or lynched for the littlest things. And so what they did was brave, right? And so thinking about the time that we're living in now, So many people are afraid. I even have a friend say, I'm not going to post that on my page because I don't want my page to be pulled and people be coming after me about this particular thing. But if we don't step up and we don't give voice to what's right, then the people who are doing the wrong wins. And they would not let them win.
Did you find any instances of where or when these women were maybe like arrested or any of like the more maybe negative side of being so outspoken in society would have been?
Yeah, well, especially on the national scale, Ida B. Wells had to run away to England for a while. But here, they were just outcasts, like Mary Roberts Tate, because she was so outspoken. Um, she became she got outcast. She later moved to New York to live with her daughter because and then there was also this friction between women. You know how sometimes we can fight among ourselves, and so some of that was happening as well between these women, and so they were a lot of times they were outcasts. They were shut down. They stopped interviewing them. They stopped talking to them. But if they kept on moving, that's yeah. So not necessarily. I don't. There is another woman that I did not talk to you about that was constantly arrested for things, but she was a whole nother person. Like she was her name is Josephine Weathers, and she actually died in 1895. I desperately want to write a book, and I think Josephine Weathers is a whole screenplay. I mean, like this woman was amazing. She was a barber. She started off in Saranac, and then she moved to Grand Rapids. But this woman, she had an alcohol problem. She was an alcoholic, but she carried a blade and would cut people on a regular basis. She would go to jail for a couple of years, get out, and cut somebody else. But she had this bigger than life personality. Um, One of the articles that I read talks about her representing herself in court and how she was interviewing, and in the court was some police, and she was walking around and she was interviewing the person that was on um, in the booth, and she turned around to a police officer that was sitting in the audience. She asked him, um, told him, "You've been in my house. What? Because she was not. They thought she was a prostitute. She's known as being a prostitute. She actually was married and had a girlfriend." And so married to a man and had a girlfriend, so she was quite out there, and so she called out this police officer for being one of her customers inside the courtroom, and he was like, "No, I ain't never been in your house." She was hilarious. They write all that. They absolutely love her. She was somewhat of a caricature. How do you say the word? Caricature. Yeah, because the papers love to write about her. Thank you for saying that word. I can't ever say that word right.
Sophia, during the progressive era, wasn't that the era where women still were considered property?
Absolutely.
So that was definitely powerful for what was it, Sarah,
Yep.
to do what
Yep.
she
She was the
did.
property of her. That she was the property of her father. That's why they went and were able to bring her back.
Yeah, because I feel like it's different from what I know from as opposed to white women as opposed to black women because I'm used to the history of black women working, but we weren't considered so much of that. But there was a lot of that existed. But just to see something like that where you're property and you still are able to fight through some of those forces
Yeah.
and still be able to make a difference.
Right. She loved wealth to move. Her father was one of the founding members for the city of Pontiac. He was, yeah, he was very influential, but he also was an abolitionist, and so the papers blamed the fact that he was an abolitionist um, for the fact that she actually had, well, the farmhand actually had access to her. Well,
Anybody else?
thank you all for coming. This is a great time to kind of stop and end the presentation. Remember that there are March 18th, Dr. Dylan Carr. Could you give Dr. Carr the mic so he can talk about what his program is going to be about? He's going to be presenting at 12 noon right here in the same space. Go ahead, Dr.
I don't think I can follow up Sophia. So
Carr.
I'm going to give an incredibly boring
No, you
presentation.
are not.
I'm an anthropologist. So basically, I'm just trying to take the grassroots readings, kind of building on this idea where you have kind of local kind of activism to sort of affect change. And so we're going to kind of provide, I want to say, a little bit of an anthropological framework for thinking about that tension between how individuals interact with structural factors and structural institutions, and using that to kind of think about the readings in there. So that's I guess the general gist of it. I don't know exactly what I'll say yet, but
Yeah, yeah,
it won't have quite the same.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It won't make a made-for-TV movie like a lot of these people. So.
Thank you.
All right, so if you guys could just give Sophia a round of applause and hope to see you at future events.
So